Shellfish Focus Day #1. You're in the right place. We're excited to have you, and we're going to give it just 2 minutes. We'll start at 2 minutes after 4, just to give a few more people a chance to get on, but it looks like we've got lots of folks already, so this will be a good event. Hi everyone, welcome to Shellfish Focus Day. We'll just give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right, Bridie, I'm going to go ahead and get started if that sounds good to you.
That sounds great.
Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shellfish Focus Day #1, the first in a 3-part series of events to highlight the Maine shellfish industry and the events happening throughout the state to help restore our mudflats. This series is being sponsored by the Maine Fishermen's Forum as part of the suite of programs that the Forum is offering this year in lieu of the annual in-person event that we would all normally be attending, I think probably next Thursday in Rockland, but that was canceled due to the global pandemic, as you all know. And as you all probably also know, normally the Thursday event is entirely dedicated to all things shellfish. So we're excited to be here today to talk shellfish with all of you all. Yeah, and it felt like there was just too much important work going on in the world of shellfish to let COVID cancel these conversations. So a group of very dedicated volunteers, including my UMaine colleague, Bridie McGreevy, who you will hear from in a minute, and many others, stepped up to help organize this series in partnership with the Maine Fishermen's Forum. And we're really thrilled that the forum decided to go for it. So my name, why am I talking? I'm Natalie Springle. I work for the University of Maine Sea Grant program. And I'm excited to be here with you tonight and to help facilitate this conversation between all of our guests who we'll introduce in a couple minutes here on this webinar, and all of you who are chimed in and listening to the webinar or viewing as it may be. I also wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and that a shortened version will be rebroadcast on the radio this coming Friday, February 26th from 4 to 5 p.m. on Maine Sea Grant's monthly public affairs program called Coastal Conversations. And that airs on WERU Community Radio at 89.9 FM and streaming online at weru.org. And the content of that radio broadcast will also then be available for podcasting and listening anytime. So if you know anyone who wanted to listen but wasn't able to make it tonight, know that there are many ways that they can hear our panelists tonight. This same approach will be the case for all 3 events in our Shellfish Focus Day series. So this week, right now, we're focusing on shellfish harvesting for the future. And then on Shellfish Focus Day #2 event, we'll be focusing on what's changing on the mudflats. And that will include a webinar on March 18th, followed by a radio broadcast that following Friday, March 26th. And then our 3rd Shellfish Focus Day event will explore shellfish markets and the seafood supply chain. That webinar date is still to be determined, but the radio broadcast will be on April 23rd. And I just threw out a bunch of information there, a lot of dates. So for information about all these events, I recommend that you follow the Maine Fishermen's Forum Facebook page, as they're doing a really great job staying up to date on all of these events, but also a number of other forum-related programming that's happening this spring and this winter since the forum in person was canceled. So the list of folks involved in helping craft Shellfish Focus Day this year is amazingly long. And you'll meet some of them tonight, and you'll meet a bunch of them at the next events. But I did want to give a particular shout out to Jessica Joyce for getting everyone coordinated. Jessica is with the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group and also with Tidal Bay Consulting. And I think she's on the Shellfish Advisory Committee. So didn't officially introduce you, Jessica, but just wanted to shout out thanks for all your help pulling these events together. So tonight, as I mentioned, our focus is on shellfish harvesting for the future, where we've asked several folks to join us in conversation and where we're going to feature stories and lessons learned about town shellfish conservation projects. So we'll hear from harvesters, wardens, and other practitioners in Harpswell, in Brunswick, and in Goldsboro, folks who are restoring shellfish populations and intertidal mudflats to protect the future of shellfish harvesting as a livelihood. You'll get a chance to ask our guests some questions throughout. Well, actually, we're going to kind of wait till a little bit later. We're first going to give our guests a chance to really kind of share their story so you know what they're up to. And then we'll have some Q&A time. I did want to let you know that the Q&A function that we're going to use is the one at the bottom in your settings of your Zoom page. You'll see a couple of little bubbles that have Q&A underneath them. We're going to use that feature for Q&A. We have our trusty UMaine graduate student, Gabby, who's monitoring that for us. Thank you, Gabby. And she's gonna sort of feed your questions to Bridie and I, who are gonna make sure to try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. We'll see, hopefully we'll be able to get to them all. So before we introduce our guests themselves, the folks who are really doing the work on the flats, I did want to introduce Dr. Bridie McGreevy, Associate Professor in the Department of Communications and Journalism and the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions at the University of Maine. Bridie has long worked with shellfish harvesters in all kinds of different ways, supporting their efforts to restore their flats, documenting their perspectives, and coordinating programs that support mudflat restoration from southern Maine to down east Maine. So I'm excited to sort of be working together with Bridie tonight to host this conversation. So Bridie, can I hand it over to you to help set the stage for what we're talking about?
You can, and thanks so much, Natalie, for that introduction and the setup. And thanks to all the panelists and attendees for being here tonight for this virtual Shellfish Focus Day. I wanted to offer some framing for the conversation and the stories that we'll hear today, because the story that we often hear about intertidal shellfish, and here I'm referring to clams, mussels, and oysters in particular, tends to emphasize all the problems that we're facing. And there are definitely many. Climate change is already having a negative impact on shellfishing communities. Warming ocean temperatures are causing changes in mudflat ecosystems and increases in predators like green crabs. Water pollution in some areas is also getting worse, and thousands of acres of mudflats are closed to clamming. And there are many social problems too. It's getting harder and harder for clammers and other fishermen to access the coast, in part because of gentrification. And rural communities continue to lack access to basic resources that they need, like internet and healthcare. And yet, the stories that you're going to hear tonight provide so much room for optimism and also many opportunities to get involved. You're going to hear stories from Brunswick, Goldsboro, and Harpswell about communities coming together to try and strengthen the future of shellfishing by growing clams and restoring intertidal mudflats. These and many other projects like them are helping all of us understand really what becomes possible when people collaborate to tackle some of the biggest problems that we face, like climate change and inequity. And so now let's hear from them about what this all means. Natalie, would you like to introduce our panelists?
Great. Yeah, this is where it gets really fun. It's starting to talk to our guests. Our guests tonight include David Wilson, who's the chair of the Marine Resources Committee in Harpswell. Hi, David. Welcome aboard.
Hello. How are you guys doing?
Great. It's great to have you. And right next to you is Scott Moody Jr., who's the vice chair of the Marine Resources Committee in Harpswell. Hi, Scott.
Hi. Thanks for having me on here.
Great. It's great to have you. And then bumping down the coast a little bit, we have Dan Devereaux, who's the Coastal Resources Manager in Brunswick. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having us.
Great to have you guys. And then we're going much further down east. And I'd love to introduce Mike Pinkham, who's a shellfish warden in the town of Goldsboro. Hi, Mike.
Hi there. Thanks for giving us a chance to put this on.
Yeah, great to have you. And then we have Sarah Hooper, who's an education specialist at the Schoodic Institute. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for letting us tell our stories as part of this.
Great. I can't wait to hear it. And then last but certainly not least, we have Bill Zellick, who's Education Research Director Emeritus at the Schoodic Institute. Hi, Bill. Welcome aboard.
Oh, Natalie, it's good to be here.
Great. Great to have you all. So as I mentioned before, feel free to, if you have a question or a comment, use the Q&A. I think Bridie is going to launch us with a first round of questions for our guests tonight.
Yeah, totally. So I think the question we all want to know as a starting point is, what are you all up to? What are you working on? Who's involved? And what are you trying to accomplish in these projects? So why don't we start in Harpswell?
Yeah, thank you. Scotty will share what we accomplished last year. And it's kind of like an ongoing 2-year project. So we were fortunate enough to get the funding last year and interested to see what takes place this year. But Scotty, good.
Yeah, part of that funding was to fund our tidal driven upweller. We didn't get that in the water last year, but we've got it pretty well constructed, and going forward, we're looking at testing that out and getting it working as well as possible. We floated the cohogs last year again through the nursery stage and maintained them throughout the summer. And the first week in November, we laid them down on the bottom for overwintering. And about a week later, went back out with an aquavision camera and checked them out to see how they were setting, and everything seemed to look good. At the end of it, we had about 6.5 gallons of total product out of the 500,000 seed that we grew. And probably 60% of those were 4 to 6 millimeters. We saw pretty significant growth considering what we were working with last year, and we're hoping to do better this year coming. So let Dave take it over.
This year we have a couple details to address on the upweller. We'll be floating that as soon as we can, and we plan on picking a number of spots in town. We really want to focus our attention where there currently hasn't been any hard shell clams for quite a while, and we want to do a variation of planting high and low, and just run a little research behind our planting methods this year.
That's great as an introduction. I know you shared some photos that maybe we can pull up later in our conversation so you can refer to the upweller and the progress that you guys have made. Next, I want to hear from Dan in Brunswick.
Hi, Bridie. Thanks. I guess the evolution of our project started around 2011, 2012. Prior to that, the town of Brunswick had a pretty robust shellfish population. We were consistently one of the top 3 shellfish towns in the state for many years when it came to shellfish. And in 2011, 2012 hit. And we all know what that brought. That brought the European green crabs further north and really exploded and decimated our populations of soft shell clams, which can be witnessed by the landings, in the previous years or the years after. So when we experienced that and lost upwards of 20 fishermen because we weren't able to license them because we didn't have the inventories that supported them, the commission at the local level started to think a little bit differently. And what they had noticed was an uptick of quahog populations. So they really focused their effort on moving quahogs around town, relaying adult quahogs here and there, and where they had known where there were quahogs. And so with that said, a few years down the road, the quahog landings grew exponentially, which led the commission, the Marine Commission, to think more along the lines of working to propagate hard shell clams in as part of resilience for climate change and ocean warming waters predators, and there's a little bit of research out there. So we applied for funding and got it through the Maine Shellfish Resilience Fund. So this is the second year that we've bought hatchery seed. And what we're doing is similar to what the town of Harpswell is doing with their floating upweller or their tidal upweller, trying to grow out quahog seed. When you talk to the people that are really good at growing quahog seed, which are a little bit south of here, of us, down around the Cape and then the Chesapeake, they're pretty adamant that quahog seed needs to reach 15 millimeters before you plant it. And so my objective when we drew the grant up here in the town of Brunswick was to offer that and see if we could grow that out in one growing season in a floating nursery, which is standard aquaculture equipment, float bags with little tiny shellfish at the surface throughout the growing season, and hopefully, they grow. We certainly got a lot of growth through this project, but we didn't get the average up to anywhere near 15 millimeters. We went from 2 millimeters to an average of around 10 and a half millimeters. So we needed to sink them down for the winter time, because obviously you need to have a place to store them, sink them down, bring them back up. I mean, and then hopefully grow them a little bit more this summer, and then plant them with the harvesters. And throughout that process, it's quite a bit of work, what we've learned. So I'll be excited to talk more about that, but I don't want to talk too much here. But no, it's a great project, and I have great confidence in it at this point.
Thanks, Dan, for that introduction. That was great. Before we go on to Goldsboro, I did wonder, David and Scott, if you could say a bit more about the upweller design, especially as it compares to what Dan just described as a floating nursery. Is what you guys are doing there in Harpswell different from that? Like, what's the upweller look like? How does it work?
It's a design that Signature Oyster from Massachusetts has operated for 15 years. They're designed solely as for the housing of oysters. We critiqued ours a little bit. We put your standard silos in it, and I think what we're asking for is going to work. What we're questioning is the dynamics of the shoe. Once we get that detail figured out, I think the operation of it's going to work well. But I mean, usually using an upweller and capturing that peak temperature along with the nutrients in the water to feed them, you gain significant growth, in the first year. I was really hoping that we could have got them in the upweller this year, but that didn't happen. I mean, we were working with a handful of volunteers that was helping us, and then it simply didn't get in the water. We didn't get it in there to find out, but we're going to further it this spring, weather permitting. We're going to get in the water as soon as we can and figure out the dynamics of, just how it works and go from there. So I think, I personally have a solar upweller I've used 2 years. I've witnessed not last year, but the year before, we nursed quahog seed right in the same place on floating gear the same time I had some in my upweller, and you can times the growth by 10 easily. You don't see such a variation in size. You have a more consistent size with all your seed. So I'm really hoping that we plan on taking the seed we have overwintering right now and putting back in the upweller until maybe the second week of July, maybe the end of July. Again, that's all weather dependent, what the temperature is going to do. So.
And last year we actually tended ours in the same similar fashion of what Dan did. However, we didn't have them in the same densities. We had much higher densities, and that definitely affected our, ending size. And it was due to what we were able to do last year.
Yeah. We started, we had 5 million seed. We started with 3 trays. At the end of it, we had 8.5 trays, so we did accommodate the growth. But I think you're limited with standard flow gear when it comes to nursing the animals. They're really, asking for that much more. So I'm hoping that we can witness that this year. I know personally, I know the difference between an upweller, and if you can gain almost a year, literally a season's growth extra in the first year, then why not? I think it'd be a useful tool for every town's management if they, intend on seeding areas and they plan on purchasing. I know there's a big difference between buying it a millimeter versus, 10 or 8. And you could, it's not only that, it's fun watching them grow.
That's great. That's really helpful. And one of the things that's so interesting about each of these projects is you're all growing seed in different ways and taking different approaches. I just think there's so much to learn across those differences. And so now to Gouldsboro, where you're engaged in similar work. And I'll leave it to you to figure out who's going to talk next.
I'm going to talk first. This is Mike Pinkham, Shellfish Warden, and lead you up to where we are currently. Early on, when I got appointed the Shellfish Warden, after spending time on the flats and talking to the diggers, I realized that the clam resource had been depleted, and you've already touched on it, due to global warming and green crabs. So we were purchasing, in the first couple of years I was a Shellfish Warden there, we purchased seed from DEI, and it was costing us $2,500 for 100,000 of seed that we could put right on the flats in the spring. And with the small group of folks that we have, diggers here, that takes a lot of money right out of our budget. So, and we had done some other projects. When we did that, it was successful, but we had to find a way to make it more cost effective. So I started talking, and I talked to the folks at DEI, which is Down East Institute, and they suggested trying to overwinter the clams. And so we met with those folks, and then I came back to the Shellfish Committee, and we told them what we had talked to DEI about, and they were very excited, because with us buying smaller clams, 2 millimeter clams, and growing them out ourselves and overwintering them, for that $2,500, we could buy a lot more clams. Instead of 100,000, we could get, 300,000. And we just had to do the work to put them on the mud. So they were very excited about that possibility. And one of the things that we've done in Gouldsboro is we've involved our students, and they wanted that to continue. The students had helped us on some of our projects, and they definitely wanted to involve the students in that process. So then we applied for some grants, and we got a grant from the Maine Shellfish Restoration Resilience Grant. We got a Maine Community Fund grant, and we got a Scuda Community Fund grant. Well, we had grants in hand. We had proposed to use a 10 by 12 building that we could move on a piece of town-owned property. That didn't work out. So we already had our grants after submitting our proposal. And so then we were in the hunt for another location to put our lab. Well, 2 other pieces of property were offered to us, and then that fell through. Early on in the process, I had spoken to Dana Rice of DB Rice Fisheries, and he had his building at his lobster buying station, and he told us that we could use that building. So I went back to Dana, and he's very involved with the town. Actually, he happens to be the first selectman in the town of Gouldsboro. And I told him that if he didn't mind, that we would like to use his building to set this lab up. And he told me to do whatever we needed to do to the building, and that he would give us a hand in any way possible. So that allowed us to have a location. The next thing that happened is we had to redesign and rethink of what our lab would look like. Instead of going from an 8 by 12 or a 10 by 12 we had much more space. And in that building was a tank that's approximately 14 feet long and 4 feet wide that we could use to put our clams in. And we were only talking about an exactic. So that brings us to today. So we're still trying to work out how the lab is going to be laid out. But I'm happy to report, as of today, I just came back and we've started construction. We did some demolition and we've started putting strapping up to sheathe the walls, et cetera. So that's where we're at.
Well, I'll follow up with what, say a little bit more about it, and got some pictures to show, but before I do that, I want to explain that Schoodic Institute started working with Gouldsboro about 4 years ago on this project, and initially it was our role was to really hook in the schools, and Sarah will say more about that. But so we've been through a process with the town of watching the resource get in trouble, and then we've been involved in trying to help the town and have the kids help the town with this new project, which is sort of to build a shellfish lab. One thing I want to say before I go, the other two towns we're talking about, so you know, some of the folks in the audience know all about this, but maybe some don't. We don't have quahogs, we don't have hard shell clams around Gouldsboro. And so the things that the other folks are talking about aren't options for us yet, although, you know, maybe in the future. So what we're talking about is still soft shell clams, and they're a little different in terms of what you can do and what's possible. And I'm going to be brief, but first I want to show you some pictures of the building that Mike was talking about. So Bridie, could you bring those up? Nope, that's not it. There we go. Great. So I'll just briefly, this is the entrance. We will have stairs someday, but right now it's a front door. Next slide. The building from the water. It's you know, right on the water, so we got access to deep water all day. And as Mike said, it's a lobster buying station. So this building is where it's at. Next slide, Bridie. I'll go inside. This is the tank he was talking about. It used to be used to hold lobsters in a retail operation, and it's one. We're hoping to get another tank like it. And then final picture. This is what today. So it's the building was a cooler for selling clams years back. So we got insulation on the walls, and today we started putting up strapping, and we'll put sheathing over that and finish it out. So let me talk just real briefly about and the idea here. There are really three things that we're trying to do. That we're wanting, of course, to see if we can develop a community scale way to grow from small seed and you know, a millimeter or two up to in this case about a ½ inch is where we can get them and then put them in the mud again. This is soft shell clams. The second thing is we want to collect data about how we do this and everything, costs, the whole bit, so that we can actually do the third thing, which is share it with other communities. So the purpose here is to look at the, first off, does it work? But then the second is, well, does it make any economic sense? Do the numbers work? And if we can figure those things out, then other towns can do it too. So those are the goals. Very briefly, for those that aren't familiar with how clams go through the year, for us, the key thing is it's a 1 year cycle, hopefully, where we start with new clams, newly hatched clams that are really microscopic, and we grow them out over an initial summer, and that's where the growth period is. Our initial plan was to just float them in trays out on the water in a lobster pound that's some protected, so that seagulls and others don't get at them. And then the real problem is other folks are talking about is, okay, yeah, that's fine. Now you've got 1/2 inch clams, but you've got to keep them alive through the winter before you can use them for the next year. And so our big focus was initially, how do you do that? How do you keep them alive? When we ended up finally in this larger building, larger than we figured, we began realizing that we could actually do some other things. And one of them is actually grow them in upwellers inside the building during the summer. And this is what other folks were talking about, really trying to get more growth more quickly. So those are things, we'll run it both ways, but we've got, again, the purpose is to try a couple of things that other towns might try, collect data, and compare things. And this is where the kids can come in and help us with the numbers. Just, I guess that's really pretty much it. The big thing is to not just how does it work and how much growth do we get, but also we'll be monitoring the electricity, all of the construction costs. We'll be looking at the labor that's involved and trying to make sure that other towns have really got a picture of what they're getting into before they get into it. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Mike, for kind of getting our project started. What I want to talk a little bit about is what Bill alluded to, is this idea of having the community and the students involved. And so we really do think this lab creates a lot of opportunities for our community and as well as other communities being involved in a lot of different ways. And so the first thing would be getting the students involved or having students involved in the lab. And we as we've been working with the town of Goldsboro in the past, what we've seen is students becoming part of their community. They're actually contributing to the community, and the community is contributing to the learning of the students. And so this just keeps building on that in really important ways. And what it creates is a system where the learning really matters. The learning matters to the students. The kids are doing real life learning with real life solutions, and the community is supporting that, and they're involved in that and benefiting from it. So it becomes a really neat interplay between both the community and the students themselves. So since we're really just getting things started and gearing up, we want to start with hopefully hiring a college intern this summer to help kind of maintain and operate the lab, doing some of the keeping the sea clams healthy by doing the cleaning of the upwellers or cleaning in the nursery trays, so kind of that day-to-day operations, but also starting to do some of the research that we feel like we need to do, so the economics, the survival and growth. And so these are where students can be part of the science and data collection for the town. And then as we get things going, we start getting more of the pieces in play, we want to start involving high school and middle school students in different aspects of the lab, so that they're contributing as well and that they're learning as well. We really want it to be a learning lab. And while we're doing this right now in the town of Goldsboro, and we want to have our local school districts involved, we see this as an opportunity for other communities and to partner with their schools and learn from it as well. And so then they can take that back to their communities, and whether they do exactly what we're doing or whether they just kind of look at that kind of partnership, we see it, we want it to be a model in that way. And the other cool thing about it is it's become there's a role for all members of the community, so not just students, but we've had such a positive response from people wanting to help support the lab itself and as well as the students involved in it. And so as Mike said, from the donation of the building and some of the equipment, we've had people that have offered to come help with the construction and do some of the work we need to get the building set up and get it going, and we're really grateful for all of that. And what's cool about that is then it really becomes a community project. And this is, Brady, kind of what you were talking about in the beginning. It becomes this community project. It's not just a restore clam flats for the clammers project or a student school project. It's a community project, and everybody's invested in it. And so as we really look to the future of our coastal communities and the intertidal, we want people to know what's going on in their community, especially as it's all changing. The resources are changing, the people in our communities are changing, and we want people to understand that. We want them to understand it's not just mud out there in the intertidal. It's a really important resource, and that we can all really come together and build the resilience. So the resiliency of the clam flat, but also the resiliency of the community, and then really helping the youth to feel a part of that, to feel a part of the community, feel a part of the solutions. So we really see a lot of potential, both for the community involvement and the youth engagement in the lab. You see, I get like super excited about all of that. Like it's really exciting piece of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank everybody. And that excitement, I think, is the perfect segue to this next question, which we're going to pose as an open question. We're really hoping that we'll be able to move into a conversation. So, anyone who feels inspired to respond to this next question, please feel free to do so. But as I'm listening to all of you talk about your projects, it's just so clear that you've invested a huge amount of time and energy and heart into this work, and that it's exciting. And as David said, it's fun to watch the clams grow. And so I'm wondering, like, why do these projects matter to you personally? How did you get involved? Why do you care about this work in the ways that you do?
I can go, Brady, if you don't mind. I can start that conversation. Well, I started working in the shellfishing industry about 30 years ago. And the changes that I've seen over that time, as being a warden, I guess you get paid. I retired after 23 years as a warden, similar to what Mike has done his entire professional career. We get paid to make observations and, or observing all the changes over the time and the decline and the harvests and the loss of licenses really drives a passion inside of me to try to create something that's sustainable and actually bolster what was there previously. So, that's really what drives me. And I live in the community that I work in. I'm not a fisherman. I work for the town. But I still have a lot of passion to see the success of our local fishermen. It's a really unique program that the state of Maine has. I think we're one of 2 states left in the coastal nation where the local municipalities actually play a really big role in the co-management of their intertidal zones. So that's really special when you look at all the other coasts. So that's what drives me to do what I do. And of course, the importance of shellfish being a keystone species in the nearshore ecosystem is quite an enthusiastic push for me as well.
Hey, this is Dave Wilson. If I could add to that, I can speak for many people owe a lot.
I hate to do this, but hey, David, I think I need you to turn off your video because you're quite broken up. So let's just do your audio.
All right.
Sorry, everyone. I know it's nicer to look at them, but we want to hear them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You hear me fine now?
Yeah, you're perfect now.
All right. Yeah, right. I owe a lot to the resource and shellfish harvesting, particularly. I do a number of other fisheries, but when I moved into Harpswell when I was 20 years old, I lived at a friend's house in a spare room. Now I own a $300,000 home, and things are looking good. And I grasped that opportunity of being a shellfish harvester. It's a piecework title, and it's just like the more effort you put into it, the more you're going to gain. And I feel that everybody deserves an opportunity like that. And to see what Harpswell used to be, what it once was and what it is now, I never thought I'd see a day like that. If I can attest to the soft shells, I wish so bad we still had soft shells, an abundance of them here in Harpswell. We've explored every enhancement practice, everything you could think of to enhance the resource here in soft shells. And I think what we're witnessing is a species that isn't given the time to adapt to climate change. And that's why there's more of them being seen, north of us, because I don't know, I think it's at the spawning stage, at that point in their life, they're more vulnerable to to the elements, and there's the acidity, the rise in the carbon in the ocean, and you compile all that, and it's not a good recipe for a larval soft shell clam. And that's why we focused a lot of attention into the soft shell clams the past 4 years, 5 years.
Well, I
Thanks.
can say, yeah, and I was going to say, and I think, David, you probably meant that you're investing a lot of energy in hard shell clams over the last 4 or 5 years, right?
Right.
Yeah. Everything that everybody said, you know, it's for me personally. I also live here year round. This is my home, and I see a community that's changing, and one of the things that I think is important about Gouldsboro is that it's a fishing community, always has been a fishing community. And part of what Sarah was talking about getting people who are now newly moving into the community and I'm potentially changing the community is really getting them involved personally in terms of getting out in the mud, getting their hands dirty, and understanding what this place is all about, and feeling like, well, that they're part of it rather than that they're something different. And so that's part of it. And then I'm an educator. I'm certainly not a clam scientist, though. I've learned some things about them, but really trying to make sure that kids both understand where it is that they're growing up, what's going on there, but also making sure that they understand that there's a livelihood here and that there's a whole range of livelihoods in these communities. You don't have to go away. So those kinds of things are all pretty high on my list.
I could add something. Bridie, I think that what got me into being excited about this is when I started talking to DEI and we started doing projects with the plant pots just to see what clam growth and survival rate, et cetera. And then I realized that we tied in with Schoodic Institute, and Bill brought a lot of educational experience. I'm not an educator. I've been a professional law enforcement officer my whole life. I don't know anything else. And viewed this as a challenge to try to improve the clam flats in the town of Gouldsboro. I started out digging clams when I was in elementary school and through college and high school and college, excuse me. So, and I can certainly see a difference from the clamming back then to now. And I'm in a position where we brought it up to the harvesters in town and they were excited about it too. And as I said, when I initially spoke, that we get to involve the community and the students, and they wanted very much focus on getting the students so that the students from these communities that support Gouldsboro understand where they come from and what it is that Gouldsboro has to offer as a fishing community.
And if I could just, I'm going to build on what everyone said just a little bit more. I'll just take it because I'm an educator and I'm fairly new to the community, and it's only taken me a short while of working with Bill and Mike and being a part of this community to see how important it is, and to recognize what's happening in the community. And then from an education standpoint, I just feel like having students really be involved in real world issues is such an important learning experience that for them to, I think we're preparing students for a future that we don't even really know what it's going to be. We've got some projections, we've got some ideas, we're trying some things. And so we need to prepare these kids to be problem solvers. And the project that we're doing in Gouldsboro, what I'm so excited about is we don't have the answers. And oftentimes in school, kids, we give them the answers. We're like, we want you to just figure out the right answer. And this is an opportunity for us to say to them, we don't know the answers and you are going to help us figure them out. And I think that kind of learning experience for students is what is going to set them up to be our future leaders, to get out there and be our future community members. because I think if they don't start learning those problem solving skills now, it's going to be harder. You know, they're going to be hit with these things in the future. And so this is just getting them hooked and getting them started early in their years.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Did everyone get a chance? Great. It's so great to hear all of your stories. And I'm starting to see a bunch of questions coming into our Q&A. Feel free to keep them coming. Actually, a couple quick things. First, for folks who are listening, in case the couple acronyms that we've heard, I just want to make sure everybody's got them. So we've heard DEI, which is the Down East Institute, where some of our towns get seed for their shellfish, and also do a lot of other things at Down East Institute, Down East. And then we've also heard DMR, which is, of course, the Department of Marine Resources. I think there were a few other in there that I'm forgetting. So before we switch gears to the questions, several of you have referred a little bit to Maine's unique way of managing our clam flats. Dan, especially, you talked about it. And I wondered if one of you or two of you could just kind of take a crack at explaining for folks how our collaborative clam flat management happens sort of in partnership between the state and the towns. Some of you are town employees, some of you are on shellfish committees in your town. So maybe, Dan, can I put you on the spot to give a quick overview of how shellfish management happens? Are you the right person?
I can give it a shot.
Great.
Maine is unique in terms of the fishing fouling navigation laws, number one. Number two, the shellfish management program is a co-management system set up with this Department of Marine Resources, which is the state agency that oversees all of the marine resources. And in that co-management system, the town has a function, and they usually function through what's called a model ordinance, which is an ordinance that's the town has established using guidelines provided by the state that establishes the number of licenses and establishes when and where flats can be dug and so on and so forth. And then it's reviewed by the state and approved. So that's how the co-management system works here. For instance, in Washington state, the intertidal lands are privately owned. So it's a different system out there. In Massachusetts, the municipalities, they have jurisdiction into their subtidal waters, whereas here, the municipalities don't have jurisdiction for shellfish management into their subtidal waters. They only have jurisdiction over their intertidal waters. So I hope that explains it a little bit, but it's really a hand in hand. You have to work with the Department of Marine Resources on most everything that we do, including providing annual reports, budgets, any type of survey work now the Department of Marine Resources asks for, so they can build databases as well and also oversee the program. And I must say that Dennis Nault, who has been working there for probably a decade or so now, is a true Mainer and does an incredible job managing all the stuff that he has to do under the guidance of Cole Camwit. So the state allows us to use their expertise to some extent. They have biologists that are assigned throughout the state based on region. We often here in Brunswick are tapping the biologists for, like, we see this, we see that, you know, what, any suggestions here? Do you want to come out and do this with us? We want to show you this area. So I'm assuming that being a larger town and tapping them, they're probably even getting tapped a little bit more from the smaller municipalities. So that's sort of how the co-management system works. Bridie may know more, or Bill may know more, but that's about all I got.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Dan. Does anyone else on our panel want to add to sort of the co-management approach that is so unique to us here in Maine?
The only thing I'd like to say that Dan did a very good job covering it, but there are over 70 municipalities that have a municipal shellfish ordinance in the state of Maine. think it's like 72 or 73. So that's a lot of municipalities managing it or in a tidal zone.
Yeah. Thanks. Hopefully that provides a little bit of context for folks who aren't as deeply steeped in all things shellfish. I think we're ready to jump into some of our questions that are in the Q&A. Thanks, folks, for sending those along. I think our first one is for David and Scott. Somebody wanted a little bit more detail on where the upweller is going to go. And where the seed is this all in Quahog Bay? And just a little bit more about where you're headed.
Yeah, we are going to be putting that in Card Cove. If you're headed south down Route 24 in Harpswell, you merge onto Long Island Road. It's going to sit like 50 yards off the shore right there. And we're going to, over the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to be picking a number of places we're going to be planting this quahog seed, and I'm hoping that we can cover probably 4 or 5 different coves with the amount of seed we have going on right now.
The seed that we currently have is what we're going to be using to research furthering, plots that we can expand our resource. And the seed that we have coming is what's going to be going into the upweller this season.
Do you guys want to share the photos?
Yeah, if you could, Brady, the photos
Yeah, sure,
of the
I'll pull up.
upweller.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Want
this
to
is
narrate what people are seeing here? Okay.
yeah, you're looking at a top view diagram, and the arrow shows the flow, shows how it operates. And the next is a side view diagram. Yeah, that right there is a left side view of the shoe. We refer to it as the shoe. A normal upweller, like the one that I operate, my solar upweller, has you have silos that the seed animals set inside, and they plug into the reservoir on a standard upweller. This box that you're looking at right now is the reservoir. We refer to it as the chute, and these silos will still be plugged into it, going exhausting outside of the chute. The chute will be gathering the force of the tide, then pushing it from vertical to lateral up through the bottom of each silo, adding nutrients and water flow to the seed that we'll have sitting in them. The next pictures there, on the other 2 pictures I gave you there, shows the silos sitting in them. Yep, that was the chute, the front of it. And yeah, I wish we had a picture of it actually sitting in the water, then you'd have a little better idea of the function and how it's going to work.
Great, that's helpful. Bill.
Well, just a question, David. Does it turn 180? Is it when to catch the tide going both ways, or is it just one way, or how's that work?
Yeah, it'll spin 180 or 360. Depending on which way the wind's blowing, it might, that's something that we're gonna be figuring out after we have it in the water. When you pick a spot for a tidal-driven upweller, I don't think you want it to be. You want it in a secluded cove where the wind isn't going to be as much of an influence as the flow. You want, dominant influence from your ebb and flow, pivoted off one end, and yeah, they work well, and they have for signature oyster in Massachusetts. They've been using them for 15 years. So we've got some modifications to do to the back of it, and we'll know more after we get it in the water.
It's really neat. Thanks for sharing.
That's great. So this next question, I think we could pose to the entire group. It is for Gouldsboro, but I think it'd be valuable to hear both Harpswell and Brunswick reflect on this in terms of the amount of time it takes. So the question is from Mike Talhauser, and he's asking how many person hours are needed for the growing lab in Gouldsboro over the year or any of these projects?
Well, I'll that's easy. We don't know. And I say that because, I mean, that's partly what we're trying to find out is, and the answer will be a little bit complicated because we're trying different things. And so, we'll be floating some flats in lobster pounds. We'll be doing some work in the summer in an upweller indoors. It means cleaning algae out of screens, and we'll have to track those things separately because it's not just the total hours, but since we're trying different things, the different things will be either more or less labor intensive. And so one of our goals is to have a really good answer for the question that Mike asked. Having said that, I guess I'm going to just pass it on to Dan. Dan's been actually doing this kind of thing quite a while, so maybe he would be able to tell you something about history.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks, Mike, for that question. That's a really great question, and we had a really good learning experience this year because we didn't have much volunteerism. So when the pandemic hit, we had to make a decision on whether to follow through with our grant obligations or to hit pause and lose 2020. We had meetings at the town with the warden and the town manager, and we just weren't willing to lose 2020 on this project. So we went ahead and we did it. We did it with the majority of staff time. We did have some volunteers that were approved and allowed to come during COVID, a couple from Bowdoin College and a couple other town employees, a contractor. But what we learned was that for the warden and myself, even floating nursery gear, as simple as it seems, anchored at 2 points, cages in the middle, critters in the cages, floating there growing, takes a significant amount of labor. That was one of our big learning lessons and will be a takeaway for us as we do more research into public aquaculture and how we can use these methods more efficiently to bolster our shellfish populations. But we are hundreds of hours into this project at this point, throughout the summer and fall and in the winter, and then putting it in. So when they really limited volunteer time, they limited the ability for us to use people to sort densities, and you're talking 500,000 animals at 2 millimeters 1 week, and then 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, they're at 5 millimeters. So they've doubled in size. So by the time we did our October sort, there were 3 5-gallon buckets full of them versus 3 sandwich bags, which we got them in. So they just continue to double, and you have to split the densities in that floating system. So there's not a lot of food competition. So we spent a lot of hours doing it, and we will evaluate that at the end of the project and see whether it's just cheaper to buy seed from the hatchery that's already grown out and then supply it to harvesters and fishermen that want to go out and plant areas in the town. So that was our experience. Very time consuming and very labor intensive.
Hey, this is Scott. Yeah, I'd just like to say after our experience the last couple of years that really that's, kind of what we're looking at. If our upweller doesn't perform the way we want to, then we're probably going to be on that aspect of just buying it, because we had a huge number of man hours in what we did last year and the year before. And we could have like separated those out probably 3 times as much, but just because of the pandemic and the lack of volunteer work, we really weren't able to spread those out and get the optimal growth that we are hoping to achieve with the upweller. So
Yeah, the year before last, we nursed coag seed and flow gear. That wasn't that bad. That requires every 2 or 3 days visiting, maintaining, sorting them like Dan said, you gotta accommodate them as they grow. We started with 2 floating trays, ended up with 8.5 trays. It should have been double that, but we simply weren't prepared. We thought we would have had the upweller in the water. We took a lot of risks this spring when we first started, because given this opportunity, I didn't want to let it slide by. So I was fortunate enough to have myself, Scotty, my 2 boys, and a couple friends. We went, right to work. We had some 10-hour days down there constructing that upweller. That consumed a lot of our time. Now that this tool has been built, then I'm hoping that we can limit the time and make it the time that we spend down there really matter. And that's something else that we're going to work on this summer after it's floating in the water. It is, yeah, I honestly can say that it would be cheaper buying them at a bigger size, but the experience and watching them grow and just having that, having that volume of interest in them, and I think it definitely makes a difference. It's as far as like the work we've got into those right now, when it comes to broadcasting those or actually planting them, I think the people that are going to be involved are going to be a little more in tuned and just exactly where we're putting them and covering all the variables and the aspects to planting them, introducing them into certain coves, certain grow areas.
yeah, it was really exciting. Every time we went down to pop those trays open, we were like,
Yeah.
what happened today?
We took measurements, but we were gauging our growth with a simple quarter, and we'd lay it beside them and take pictures. And it was, yeah, we have some videos of just my phone sitting stationary. And if you give it a minute or two, you can actually watch these 2, 3, 4 millimeter quahogs move around. Like they're pretty busy little animals.
Yeah, they're using their foot to scoot around.
Yeah, it is interesting.
That is very cool. Maybe at some point we can figure out a way to share some of your neat video.
Yeah.
What I'm really hearing from all of you guys is just the incredible commitment to your projects in your towns, which leads us to a great follow-up question that is directed a little bit towards Gouldsboro, I think, but I think is a good bigger picture question about sort of engaging people in your communities. So this is a question from Dale Levitt, who says, the problem with recruiting students to help is in the disjoint and timing. Nursery season is the same as summer vacation, and it's difficult to get students to participate without a formal classroom environment. How are you working around that from a timing standpoint? And then sort of to broaden the question out, just sort of a larger question about engaging volunteers in your communities.
Thanks for that, and thanks to I'll start with that in terms of just students and classroom time. And so yeah, the timing of school and summer is a disjoint, and so that's why what we want to start with is looking at other kinds of engagement of community members and student and maybe older students, like college interns. So when they're off for the summer, actually paying them to be part of our community and part of the project. And so starting there, eventually what we would like to do, I would really love to start doing, is getting high school interns. And so again, making it summer economical summer work for them. So again, building their part in the community in an economical and way that they can be involved in it. I do, and actually listening to both Dan and David and Scott, boy, I'm thinking like my eyes are getting bigger, thinking, oh wow, we got a lot of work to do. And so I think even during the school year, there will be enough other ways for students to get involved, whether it's just working on the economic data, working on like other kinds of work in putting looking at survival and growth in the clam flats themselves. And so there'll be other ways to get students involved. We had middle schoolers out a couple of years ago looking at green crab populations. So it'll be finding other ways that connect students during the school year to the project, just bringing them to the lab and seeing ways that they can get involved. And so you're absolutely right that we won't be able to do everything, especially during the summer. But we'll find ways to involve at least students in different ways and using different groups of students at different times.
I'll just add on quickly. We have found that sometimes there's a lot of different questions that the kids can get involved in. Like, one of our concerns really is the overwintering and how will that work? What's the mortality? So winter will also be a busy time for the kids. And then in the spring, when we're actually pulling the clams out, really having the kids do some sampling work with learning about making an estimate about mortality from a sample. So there's those things. We've also in the past involved the students in helping us look at settlement. One of the big questions for us is, okay, we've got clam seed, where are we going to put it? And so involving the students in basically collecting information about growth, mortality, and recruitment in different coves, which is something that they can do in the fall, analyze the data over the winter and present it back in the spring. So you're right that in terms of just the summer work, but it's a very rich thing for the kids to be involved in, and there are really a lot of opportunities. I guess I'll just
getting some great.
I said that Dan. I was going to say Dan has also worked for years with Brunswick students on that, and might have something.
I can add, it's really been a complex issue getting students down to the mud flats. And in particular, when we have projects that run through the summer, quite frankly, Bill, what we've done is paid them to do their monitoring. So we give them a financial benefit. And then they still have to do report. They still have to do a report out, collect the data, and then finish it off in their class at high school. So that's what we've done. But oftentimes we have the kind of convenience of having a Bowdoin College right in town too. So every once in a while we can scrape one or two of those students to help with projects and be involved more. So we're trying to get our mainstream students involved with shellfish aquaculture more. Initially, we went to our region technical school and thought about trying to introduce this stuff there. But what we learned is that the fraction of students there that we actually connect with, they're a fraction to what is in the major population at the high school. So we felt the bigger bang for our buck was going kind of to the general population of the high school and trying to get them involved, which included, getting them from the high school a mile down to the road, changed in gear, and going out on the flats and collecting data, and all back for math class at 2 o'clock an hour later. So a bit challenging to say the least. And then summers, of course, we had to pay them.
So I worked as an environmental educator for about 10 years. So all of these stories are very familiar to me. The challenge of getting kids outside, but also the value. We have a number of questions that are still coming in from our attendees. So we're going to take another one. We have an attendee from Block Island in Rhode Island asking about using the upweller to raise soft shell clams, because they have a project there where they're trying to do this or thinking about doing it. But but Bosco is asking about the relative success of raising soft-shell clams this way. What's your experience? I know Gouldsboro, you're still building the capacity for growing these clams. If in Brunswick and Harpswell, you can talk about soft-shell clams versus quahogs, or how you think about, you know, what makes sense to grow in upwellers.
Well, I can, what we're building on is experience at the Down East Institute, and they have been culturing clams. Actually, they actually grow them right in the lab, and then have been doing that for, oh gosh, a decade or more. And the Brian Beal has explained to us that once he puts them in an upweller, the soft shell clams do grow much more quickly than they do just in a tray, which is what got us interested. So although we haven't had experience, the Down East Institute has been growing soft shell clams in floating trays and upwellers for quite some time, and so it can be done. The difference between hard and soft is more than I could talk about. I just don't know, but.
Maybe David could talk about the upweller a little bit more in his experience. Unfortunately, in Brunswick, we do not have or run an upweller, and our wild plantings with soft shell clams in the last decade have been relatively unsuccessful.
And I will add that one of the comments that we've gotten in the Q&A is more a comment from Dale Levitt that says you need fairly substantial flow to make tidal upwellers work, about 4 knots or more, is his comment, FYI. David or Scott, did you guys want to add?
Yeah, we're well aware of that. Where we have it located, I think we may have to move it closer to the mouth of this particular cove, and then we would gain the required flow. I backed off at first. Like I said, we're gonna put the animals in there, or it might even start with something that's similar size, similar density, and see how it performs. This is all still a learning process with us. I grew hard shell clams. I have no experience with the soft shells in an upweller, but in 2018, I built an upweller. We run it off solar. We ran it 2018 and 19. We had over 1 million animals in the upweller both years. And the farmer that I was doing it with had never used an upweller. He was literally blown away by the amount of growth he's seen in the first month and a half. Since then, he has built his own, twice the size. But a tidal driven upweller, you know, we're not asking for the solar. We didn't have the funding to go with solar like mine. So I felt our best opt was a tidal driven. I'd like to think that we have it figured out. Who knows? We may not. Like I said, if we have to, we plan on doing modifications to the upweller and moving the location if needed. That's really all I could say as far as like with the upweller. It's a project in its own, you know, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm really excited about it this summer and seeing how it performs, because I think, like I said, I hope it's going to be Harpswell's tool, you know, from here on out, and hopefully we can build a couple more.
Yeah, it would definitely be beneficial for us. You know, I think it'd be a little bit lower on the maintenance side of it, and as well as the expense. You know, we're definitely looking at the factors, and that's why we want to try and get it out a little bit early, and you know, do more studying before we even bother to put the shellfish in there, to see where we're at with flow and things like that.
On the soft shell side, one thing that we're going to be looking at is whether we end up getting too fast and too much growth in the summer. It sounds funny to say, but unlike hard shell clams, once the soft shell clams reach about a 1/2 inch or so, they're sort of done growing just in water, and they need to be in the mud. So that's something that is actually a question that we'll be looking at this year.
Great, thank you, everyone. Great questions coming in. So another one that has come in is actually a few questions from Barbara Lawrence. So this is a couple different questions, so we'll try to summarize them into a few simple ones. You've mentioned some sources of funding. What others would you suggest? So that's question one, sources of funding. And then a different one is, are clams the best way to start? What about mussels and oysters? So shellfish raised in Camden Harbor, for example, will not be able to be edible by humans, at least for a while. So what advice do you have about engaging people in restoring shellfish to help restore water quality? So there's one more question, but we'll stop there for a second. So funding options and species that you might be engaged in raising. And then the third one being the water quality question. And that's obviously wide open to any of you who might have thoughts on any of those. And Bridie, you might have some thoughts as well on the funding options.
Natalie, I'll start the conversation.
Great, thank you, Dan.
In reference to the question about Camden Harbor and not being able to eat the shellfish that are, or harvest the shellfish that are planted there, but more using them as an ecological filter, I would encourage them to reach out to the Billion Oyster Project in New York and see what they did. There's no reason, I don't think, that shellfish wouldn't grow in Camden Harbor. You'd have to do some trials and stuff, but it would be interesting to see somebody use a project like that, use shellfish in a project like that in an area that's prohibited from harvesting in the state of Maine, just for the ecological benefits. That's really cool idea. And whether it's mussels tend to be a little bit more susceptible to predation than hard shell clams or softer shells. So I guess in the knowledge that I have, I would go with the easy one to grow in Camden Harbor, which would be oysters probably. So, but again, the Billion Oyster Project is awesome, and they're running it in New York Harbor to try to clean that up. And so I would encourage that person to reach out to them if they're going to try to use shellfish as an ecological filter, and the best way to do it.
Cool, thank you, Dan. So that was the Billion Oyster Project in New York?
I think it's called the Billion Oyster Project. I bet you Bridie knows what it's called.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I can make a plug for a few funding sources just to put on people's radar. But I would also say that the Maine Shellfish Learning Network, myself, Gabby, Tony Sutton is on the line as well. We're also happy to help support matchmaking with potential funding sources. And then there are these regional efforts, the Down East Fisheries Partnership and the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group, that are also playing this facilitating role. So feel free to reach out if you want to brainstorm grant ideas or want to identify additional funding sources. A couple to have on the radar include the Maine Shellfish Restoration and Resilience Fund. All of these projects have received some funding through the MSRF. The proposals are typically due in January. We don't know if this fund is going to be available again next year, but it's really been a great source of support for creating these applied shellfish projects and community development efforts. Maine Sea Grant has a number of different funding opportunities, and maybe Natalie, you might be able to speak to those, but they have a very easy to navigate website. We could circulate the link for that. The Water Resources Research Institute, WRRI, is a program of the United States Geologic Survey, and the Maine-based chapter is administered through the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions. That would be an appropriate source for water quality focused projects, and it needs to have a connection to an academic outfit. but we could help with that as well. So those are a few. The Maine Community Foundation is another great potential funding source. And again, please feel free to reach out if we can help you brainstorm these.
Thanks, Bridie, and thanks for that question. So I'm just pausing for a second to see if any of our guests were going to hop in and add something. And I'm pretty sure that we have a couple people who are on the phone who are likely unable to submit questions through the Q&A format. So I'll take a second to pause here as well so that you have the opportunity to perhaps verbalize your questions. I'm not 100% sure if that's possible on the webinar format, but we'll try. What you have to do is *6 your phone, is press the key *6. So I'll just keep talking slowly to give you a second to try to do that. And if in a second we don't hear from anyone on the phone, we'll move on to our questions in the Q&A box. All right. Okay, so next in the Q&A box, a question from Dana Morris. Hi, Dana. Dana says, great work, everyone, really cool. For growing hard clams, sometimes it's helpful to select fast growers as broodstock because the offspring might have a growth advantage. But on the other hand, that also can create some concern about the existing shellfish in a reseeded area potentially being outcompeted by a farmed strain. Are the seed being used presently selected for fast growth at all? And would that be desirable or not by municipal efforts? Anyone have some thoughts on that from our panelists?
That's a really good question that I'm not sure of. I know that we source our seed in this project. We source our seed from the Down East Institute and Muscongas Bay. And I'm not sure, Dana, great question. I will find out and get back to you.
Yeah, if I could add to Dana's question, I don't know. And that has been one of my biggest concerns. Hopefully moving forward with Harpswell's management practice, I would like to incorporate collection boxes that will collect native spawn seed, and that will allow us to grow the native spawn seed out rather than opting to buying hatchery seed. I think that's what all municipalities should do, is deploy collection boxes during the spawning session in every spring and try to collect your own native spawn to work with. I think you're gonna have better results because you're working with the local genetics. Maybe there isn't that big of a variation, but I personally think strongly that we would see much more success if we was working with those local immediate genetics throughout our municipalities.
All right, great. Tom Shields has a question about the quahog overwintering process. So he says, can you explain that process? Will this be in a closed system and or outplanting in bags in suitable habitat? How are you going to overwinter the quahogs? I think this one's for David and Scott.
They're asking the exactly how you overwintered them or how we are overwintering them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What does that process look like?
Just in your standard nursery 7mm bags, spread across the hard wire. We have them sitting on the bottom.
Great. Dan, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, for this project, we diversified because we hadn't overwintered a lot of quahogs like we did this year. What we do is we put them in Like David said, the spat bags, rigid mesh backing, those go inside standard oyster grow cage, suspended oyster grow cage, which is sunk down to the bottom, and the pontoons sit on the bottom so that the critters are up off of the mud and they're not sitting down in the mud. They're just sitting in the cages protected. And we did half of our crop that way. And then Brian Beal was gracious enough. His name comes up a lot when you talk about shellfish, especially in Maine. He was gracious enough because we had established such a good relationship with these shellfish and we didn't want to kill them. We sent them back up to the hatchery to be overwintered in a closed system. So we have them and sort of compare the mortality to, it'll give us an idea. So that's what we did for overwintering.
I know this question was focused on quahogs, but I wonder, Goldsboro, what are you doing with overwintering?
Well, I was sort of wondering whether, I mean, a different thing is if we're successful with our overwintering of soft shell clams and can figure out the economics at a community scale, maybe that would be something actually that Dan and others could use on a community scale. So what we're doing, I can't think of anything about what we're doing that's too specific to soft shell clams. They don't grow that, not the clams in general, but basically it's keeping them alive. They're not feeding a whole lot during the winter. So if we can figure out how to do community scale overwintering of soft shell, maybe we'll team up with David and Scott and Dan and see if we can do it with hard shell too. We just don't have quahogs yet. It may be that they're moving up further down east. I know that they're beginning to show up on the other side of Mount Desert Island on the Blue Hill Bay side. So it may be that quahogs are in our future, which would be fantastic. I can't wait.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to let you know that Kyle Pepperman, who works at the Down East Institute, is on the line, and he just wanted to share that all of Down East Institute's seeds, since we've been talking about DEI seed, are produced from Maine broodstock found in Eastern Maine. So that's just a point of information for everyone. A question for all three towns here. So for a town shellfish committee that might be thinking about getting into restoration projects, but just don't really know where to even begin, what would you recommend as good ways to get started?
I'll jump in on that one.
Great.
Talk to Dr. Beal and his staff, Kyle Pepperman. I've rang the phone off and talked to Kyle more times. And in fact, Bill and I met with Dr. Beal a couple of weeks ago in person. So they are a great wealth of knowledge. Everything that they're doing is on a larger scale than a municipality would do, but they certainly got the ideas because they started out small before they got as big as they are now.
I would add to that, Dan's already mentioned the tremendous resource that the Department of Marine Resource regional biologists are, but get in touch with your DMR regional biologist and begin finding out what's going on and what the issues are. And I will say that with the 73-ish municipalities, they vary quite a bit in terms of what their focus is and in terms of how they operate. So certainly getting to know something about your local shellfish committee and understanding who's in it and how it works would be really important.
Yeah, if Dan?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, sorry, if I may add, I think the most important thing a volunteer could do is become a sponge of information. We're like evolve, our management has to evolve with this climate change, and common practice no longer works. It hasn't worked for us with the soft shells. That's why we've directed more attention towards the hard shell. We've seen such an influx in predation that I'm really hoping that it doesn't roll over onto the hard shells as well. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing I could tell to anybody is just become a sponge, get in touch with whoever you can and find out what's maybe working for this town or that town. But you also have to keep in mind with the ever changing temperatures in the ocean that what worked last year may not work this year. I don't know. I think it's you gotta be as broad as you can and as open as you can, and be willing to try, you know, explore every avenue in the management practice.
I agree. Like the good fisherman says, it's hard telling, not knowing, right? So, you know, I think you get involved at the local level and connect with the area fishermen in the local shellfish committees to really connect with the fabric that holds the industry together in Maine. And that's really where the metal meets the meat and the work is done. Dennis Knoll and his team of biologists are a great resource as well. And the DMR has some great online resources. If you go onto their shellfish management program page, and you can, you know, it's really good information. So if a person wants to, they can certainly find avenues to get involved.
I think you've all spoken to this, but just to emphasize this point a little bit more and maybe point to the specific opportunity for getting involved. Many of these towns meet on a monthly basis, some a little bit more frequently, some a little less frequently. And I'll never forget the first Shellfish Committee meeting I went to. It was in a town hall in Lemoyne in Frenchman Bay. I was there with a group called the Frenchman Bay Partners, part of doctoral work I was doing. And I stepped into a world that I didn't even know existed, where people were coming together, clammers, administering this ordinance, doing conservation work, trying to sustain this resource, getting out on the mudflats together, being in some of the most beautiful places in the world. And, you know, getting involved in that space for me personally has been very meaningful. I mean, it's changed what I think about, the kind of research that I do, the relationships. And so figuring out, you know, when does your Shellfish Committee meet on a monthly basis and where, and how could you show up and start listening to what's going on in those spaces and getting involved is really a great adventure. So
Ties
with
back
that,
to the. I was just going to say, Brady, it ties back to the question that you asked early on, and which is what is it that keeps us engaged and gets the juices flowing? Why are we doing this? And just adding on to what you said, this is so local. This is, you know, this is also so Maine. This is what, speaking what Dan was sort of saying. So, you know, it's like a town meeting or something. It really is something where it's folks in the community trying to look after what it is that they've got. It's good work.
I was just going to hop on and just check in with our speakers. If you guys have any questions for each other, you guys are from very different towns across the coast. Harpswell and Brunswick, you're a little bit closer to each other, and maybe you talk offline. But what are you curious about knowing from each other as your projects advance, and what sort of lessons learned do you think you can learn from each other?
I'll start again because I'm excited about the Gouldsboro project, actually. Having a little self-sustaining community lab is really something that myself and our school department has talked about on numerous occasions. So it'll be really interesting to watch the project develop. I don't have any questions now, but I can guarantee you that I'll have questions in another year. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that, because that's been a long shot radar for the town of Brunswick for a long time. We don't have people in town that are willing to give us buildings and stuff like that. This is more southern Maine. So every little stitch of property has some sort of value, I guess, to these people. So that's where we are. But thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah,
Actually, I'm gonna pop it. Oh, sorry, David, do you want to go ahead, or Scott?
I'm very excited for what you guys are doing, and would love to see you guys get the ball rolling, and especially for this season. I wish we had the same here in Harpswell, but I think the more people you get involved, people that have never even thought about fishing or commercially harvesting shellfish for a livelihood, I think that could possibly change some minds and get more people involved, more people that are willing to do exactly what you guys are doing. And good and good luck. I wish the best. I'd like to help you in any way.
I think that's what's so exciting about this is the openness between the different communities to work with each other. And Dan, I want to pop it right back at you because we in this project and bringing the schools in, you've had a longer relationship with the schools, and it can be, as we've talked about, it's lots and lots of potential, but it can also be tricky. And so just keeping the communication open to see what do these partnerships look like with schools, how do you sustain the school community partnership, I think will all be really important conversations as we go forward.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think that with us, the communities that are sitting here talking at this webinar right now is very important. I've learned some things of interest that from the other two groups here. And everybody is trying things, and it's already been said that what works in Eastern Maine may not work in Mid-Coast or Southern Maine, but we can sure give each other a place to start. And it's very exciting to have these connections. I've known Dan for years, but just seeing Scott and David and hearing their enthusiasm about that project reaffirms that we are doing the right thing in getting our community involved in. This is a way to do it by bringing folks onto this webinar and listening to, and maybe getting some enthusiasm worked up between them like we have amongst ourselves. And thanks.
Great. Well, this has just been a vibrant discussion, lots of good questions. We're now at time where we're going to be asking the last question of the night. And this one is connecting to some of the research that the Maine Shellfish Learning Network has been doing to understand these projects. There are about 25 funded projects through the Maine Shellfish Restoration Resilience Fund that are active right now. And we wanted to learn about how are these projects going, what kinds of successes are happening, what kinds of problems, challenges are these projects facing. And one thing that we've heard consistently from a number of projects, and I think you all have spoken to this a bit tonight as well, is that there's been a challenge with volunteer participation, that a lot of this work is falling on the shoulders of a few people. We have a lot of listeners out there. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the volunteer needs that you have. If you could just find that person or that group of people who could help you with this thing, or how people could get involved in the kind of work that you're doing and the projects that you're leading.
I'll jump in, and this is Bill's idea, and we've been tossing it around. We've had volunteers that have contacted us about working and helping us do the lab. And one of the things that we've thought about, and this is just food for thought, again, this is Bill's thought, is that we have a day, maybe we go out and we invite folks down, like a community event, to go down and plant beetle boxes. Someday when it's going to be a nice day and we get a permit and we get down and we put some beetle boxes in and get some folks just to come down and see what it is. Because as you said, a lot of folks, even though they live on the coast, I mean, this is with our students. We had students that had never been to the shore before until we took them. So if we could invite them down and show them what we're trying to do and give them a little explanation, maybe we can excite some folks to volunteer, because volunteers, I only have 9 members on my shellfish committee, and that's it. Besides Bill, Sarah, and I, and now we've got this other group of volunteers that are coming in, but it's going to be important to help us. But I don't think that you can have too many when the amount of work that we're trying to undertake.
I can go a little bit because we struggled this last year with volunteerism, but typically we don't struggle with a lot of volunteerism because we have conservation credit, another unique thing that's unique to shellfishing, not only in this country, but probably in the world. Maine clammers are, in most towns, are afforded an opportunity to garner conservation credit towards their next season's license, and they do that, and that's how we get a lot of our conservation hours. So this last year, though, was a little bit, like I said, we ran short. But I really think where we seem to get, and I'll say civilian conservation volunteers, is through the school systems, through our education system. And each year we go into our junior high, our elementary, and our high school, and we talk about shellfishing. And we're hoping that those kids go home with something and tell their parents about shellfishing. And then that gets them interested. And it has on several different occasions where we'll get a call, or I'll get a call in my office 2 days after we give a presentation at the elementary school wanting to know more about the program. And then I'm like, ha, it's working. And how can they help? So, you know, that and through the college system that we have, Bowdoin College here in town. So.
David and Scott, anything to add on the volunteer front?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we didn't receive a whole lot of volunteer help with the project this year due to the pandemic. And I can tell you that a lot of our harvesters that are required to do that conservation time every year that Dan had mentioned, we have a lot of negative outlook upon that because the practices that we've done in the past with the soft shell has been a complete failure for many reasons. But we're trying, like, yeah, this is our third year into it, but we're trying to shed some light on, you know, what we could potentially do with the hard shell. And I know in 2016 I had a group of students from the Harpswell Charter Coastal Academy, one of the elementary classes. They came down and we were deploying some 2mm screening to ward off predation from the ribbon worms. That's been such an influence here in Harpswell since 2008, 2009. We've had such an influx in the ribbon worms, and that's been one of our biggest nemesis when it comes to the soft shell clams. And the interest that a lot of these kids had, and I think there was only one of them there that, you know, was familiar with tidal flats. I mean, we had a hard enough time just getting them out there. I think everybody in the group fell down, but it was fun and they all had fun. And I know they left, you know, with some really good impressions in it. But I would like to see more students involved in the management process. Right. You know, our management and some of the practice that municipalities are given with our management really dictates how many licenses a municipality can issue for people to go out and harvest. Harpswell has a good number of harvesters, but all but 10% of those have sought out alternative sources of income because of the decline in our resources. And I think we want more than anything to get those, you know, get them back and just enhance the resources and hopefully, who knows, you know, a couple years from now, be issuing more licenses to individuals that, you know, are interested and do want to get involved.
Yeah, I'd like to just add, like, you know, one of the big factors we're taking in is that we've seen the decline in soft shell clam over the past few years, and that we're seeing this incline in our landing reports for the hard shell clams, and being able to figure out what things we can do to help enhance that, I think is great. Something I really want to look at is trying to pick out some of the variables as far as like peak temperatures, spawning temperatures, and things that we could use to compare like to like the Massachusetts systems and maybe be able to pick towns that we could use, you know, to run some comparisons on and on their peak temperatures and when they started seeing a decrease in their, you know, landings, if nothing more. I think that would be something really useful that we could do.
That's great, guys. And I just wanted to chime in to say that you've hit on a couple of other questions. We had a few lingering questions in our Q&A. One was somebody was asking about some of the key predators were for soft shell clams, and you mentioned the ribbon worm. That was one. And then there was also a suggestion of for the quahogs to potentially reach out to the Shellfish Constable in Massachusetts, who have been working with quahogs for more than 25 years. So I don't know if you had any other comments about either predation or potentially working with folks and learning and exchanging with folks in Massachusetts.
Yeah, we're just trying to look at the factors we can use to make those comparisons and choose the towns that we could use information from. I guess the biggest thing we could do.
Yeah, if there's any municipality or any organization out there that, you know, has some advice and, you know, and some direction, yeah, please give them my number. I give them all, you know, all of our numbers.
Yeah, that's a great point also, because somebody asked if we follow up with questions from you guys. And I would say to those who do want to do any following up, wherever you heard about this this webinar, there was, I'm hoping, a contact name and email address to reach us. So feel free to use that, whether it's reaching out to Bridie or me, and we will happily put you in contact. Our attendees, we will happily put you in contact with the presenters here today. I'm assuming presenters. I should double check with you that you're all cool with that, but I'm making that assumption.
And we'll also be sharing all the questions with the panelists as well as part of the record of this webinar.
All right.
Natalie, can I just add something? I don't know how much time we have left, but in 2000, it must have been 13 or 14, someone had suggested going down and talking to the Shellfish Constable down in Massachusetts. We scheduled a trip down to the town of Barnstable and actually spoke to a couple fellas down there. For an entire week, we actually went over the town's development plans and sort of studied the history of when the natural shell fisheries started to decline and they started to introduce more opportunity for farming and that type of stuff. And it was really an interesting conversation that lasted hours. And the sort of writing was on the wall, like, holy smokes, man, you guys were going through the same thing we were going through. You guys are going through it in 1990. What's going on? You know, almost the exact same thing in some of these documents that we were reading when we were reviewing it. And so Tom Marcotti and Doug Calwett, who is the natural resource director, were very supportive and giving us all of their information. So I think that if any municipality wants to reach out to one of those towns down on the Cape, I think that they would welcome you with open arms, and they just pour out the knowledge and the wisdom that they have garnered over the last 20 something years. So we learned a lot from that. That's the point I wanted to make.
Great, thanks, Dan. I just want to check in with Bridie if you have any other final questions as we sort of wind down here.
You know, I don't think so. The only thing that we didn't quite touch on that may be of value to folks who want to do this kind of project is about the kind of licensing. And I know that's a whole can of worms that would take another webinar in and of itself. But just like maybe a couple of quick comments about the licensing process that you had to go through to set up, you know, a project like this. What does that look like?
we were able to avoid licensing in the subtidal waters for our floating nurseries because we used existing farms with those species already on them. So we coordinated with farmers and harvesters to work together to deploy the cages on those certain spots on those farms. So we avoided licensure. But I guess like for an LPA license or something like that, what the towns are going to have to do is follow the limited purpose aquaculture lease and licensing. And there's some talk at the Shellfish Advisory Council level about maybe making that process a little bit easier for municipalities because it is a co-management kind of setup already. So, but the licensure has been a problem for some southern Maine municipalities as they get into more public aquaculture where they're really trying to grow and propagate and conduct husbandry with the community. They're running into some licensing issues.
Are there any other thoughts from any of our speakers about anything else that has occurred to you, either a question for each other or anything that you'll think after you get off the Zoom? Shoot, I should have talked about that. All right. Well, it seems like we are pretty much winding down now then. Thank you so much to all, particularly our attendees, the folks who have chimed in and listened to this whole conversation. It's been great to have all of your questions. We got to most of them, or at least touched on the themes of most of them, I hope. And an especially large thank you to all of our participants. So just to remind everybody, we've been talking with David Wilson, who's the chair of the Marine Resources Committee from Harpswell, and Scott Moody Jr., who's the vice chair of the Marine Resources Committee from Harpswell. We've been talking with Dan Devereaux, Coastal Resources Manager from Brunswick, with Mike Pinkham, the Shellfish Warden of Goldsboro, with Sarah Hooper, the Education Specialist at the Schoodic Institute, and with Bill Zellick, the Education Research Director Emeritus from the Schoodic Institute. We've also been chatting with Bridie McGreevy from the University of Maine and the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions at the University of Maine. For folks who are listening right now, like we said, we will share all of the questions with the panelists so they see the full scope. If you wanted to get information about when the Shellfish Day #2 and Shellfish Day #3 will be held both in webinar form and in radio form, remember to just hop on to the Maine Fishermen's Forum Facebook page. That will give you all of the latest announcements. And this particular webinar is about to be edited down to an hour instead of nearly 2, and that will air on WERU Community Radio this Friday from 4 to 5. And it's at 89.9 FM in Blue Hill and also streaming online at weru.org. And I think with that, we are done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Bridie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Have a good night. Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.